Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, a mom of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you so that you can connect to the information and inspiration every single week and feel supported as you navigate those sometimes very tricky days of being a yoga teacher and also a business owner. I know after talking with hundreds of thousands of yoga teachers over the years that one of our main goals is to create safe and inclusive yoga spaces. And we've been having a lot of these conversations on the podcast. And those podcast episodes can be found in our show notes for today's episode. And you can always search our website as well. We have a little search icon at the top. It works very well. When I'm looking for a podcast episode, that's often where I will go. Because I can't remember all of the numbers that go with each and every podcast episode. So let me list a few so that you can just think back to these episodes if you're a regular listener, or think about if you might like to also go and have a listen to these after today. Back in episode 92, we talked with Chantel, Katie, and Elliot all about accessible yoga and language. In episode 138, we talked with Jeevana Heyman, who really specializes in making yoga accessible. In episode 108, I talked about inclusive language for prenatal yoga. Yoni Fung talked to us in episode 146, and we talked about inclusive and safe practices. And this year, we've also had some amazing conversations with special guests on the topic of social justice and anti-racism. Huge shout out to Jaisal Parikh, Chara Carruthers, Maria Kirsten, and Michelle Johnson for really digging in and helping to bring this information to all of us. Recently, in episode 195, I talked with Tristan Katz all about LGBTQ awareness and how this applies to a yoga class. In today's episode, I wanted to bring you a different perspective of what it's like to create an inclusive yoga space, but from the perspective of the yoga student. What does an inclusive yoga space look like, but also feel like? Erin Ajayi reached out to me in response to an email I'd sent out to all of the connected yoga teachers asking how I could do better in supporting the Black community of yoga teachers. This was back in June. The title of my email was, I Want to Do Better. And in her email response, Erin shared some really deep insights that helped me reevaluate my thinking and consider how else I can hold space and give voice to this marginalized group within our community. I feel like this email from Erin was such a gift. And I'm so glad that she's here on the podcast today to talk to us about the experience of yoga students of color from her perspective as a Black woman, so that we can really explore some thought-provoking questions like, how can studios be more inclusive of people of color? And how does mainstream yoga perpetuate exclusion or even racism? Erin also shares some of the adverse personal experiences she's had within the yoga world and how we as yoga teachers, studios, and practitioners can find alternatives. All of our show notes are ready for you over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/199. There you can comment and also find all of the links that we talk about today. If you are listening to today's episode, this is the week of holidays and in our house, Christmas. And one of the best gifts that you could give to the podcast, to me, if you're enjoying this podcast, is to leave a review. So I don't know if you've left a review yet. If you haven't, you can head on over to iTunes or right from our show notes page at theconnectedyogateacher.com/199. Then you can leave a review there. 199 Connected Yoga Teachers. Can you believe next week is episode number 200? And as we get close to episode 200, I just feel so much gratitude to you for listening, to our sponsor, to our team. Let me talk about our sponsor for a moment. Schedulicity has been the company that I have used for scheduling since 2011. This is a company that really cares about their customers. Not only yoga teachers and studios, but they work with massage therapists, hairstylists, estheticians, all kinds of people use Schedulicity to book the services that they would like. Let's hear our hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hey Connected Yoga teachers, this is Katie with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Gentle and restorative yoga can be such a fantastic addition to so many different lifestyles. Client tags in Schedulicity can help you market the same class in different ways to appeal to different lifestyles. Tag your clients as athletes and let them know that your restorative classes offer excellent support for overworked joints. Tag your clients as seniors and send them a message about the ways that these easy movements can help improve cardiovascular health and reduce the risk of falling. For students dealing with injury or emotional turmoil, you can invite them to see how this yoga practice can enhance recovery, aid with grieving, or brighten mood and outlook. The best part of these tags is that they are private, so your clients will never know if you tag them as seniors or athletes. We'll just keep that between us.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. Now let's dive in and meet Erin. Erin Ajayi is the Senior Director of Development at I Live Here, I Give Here, a nonprofit organization with the mission to make Central Texas the most generous community in the nation. Erin is also a part-time yoga teacher who has taught in studio spaces and college and university spaces. She came to yoga as a result of a running injury while training for a half marathon, and since then, her relationship with yoga has evolved and she has discovered the practices of yoga beyond asana, including the yamas and the niyamas, as well as the chakra system. Today, Erin teaches restorative yoga to help her students show up to the moments in their lives. In addition to practicing and teaching yoga, Erin enjoys taking improv classes, hosting game nights, and planning her next travel adventure with her husband. Let's meet Erin and find out how we can create more inclusive yoga spaces. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. Erin, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you. Really, really excited to be a guest.
I am so honored that you sent me this email a while back. I sent an email out in June, I think we had said, basically saying like, I'm looking at how to improve kind of thing. And you replied back with an amazing email that kind of led us to our topic. But before we even get into like how to make our yoga spaces more inclusive for BIPOC, I want to talk about like, what was your yoga journey? How did you get into teaching yoga and what does that look like now?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back to your email, I know that the subject line was, I want to do better. And you sent it out right after the murder of George Floyd. And so for me, that was particularly having followed your podcast, being involved in the Facebook group, I saw that one morning and immediately paused. And so I just wanted to say thank you for kind of sitting back and taking that position of humility and opening the door to wider conversations. And even over the summer, since you sent that email, I've consistently seen in your podcast as well as the Facebook group, your continual opening the door to getting more space and more awareness around issues related to racism within the yoga world, but also to teachers how to make their environments a little bit more inclusive and kind of how to do that hard work. So just wanted to thank you for offering that starting point in that platform.
Well, thank you for that. I also want to say, like, your email back was like, okay, Shannon, if you want to do better, here's a great list. It was like so clearly outlined. It was one of the biggest gifts of this year, really. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'll talk a little bit, about my journey to yoga. So I've been a student far longer than I've been teaching. I first came to yoga around 2012, like many folks entering through the physical practice. For me, it was a way to balance out training for a marathon and also trying to get more flexibility. Then I think it stepped away from it a little bit just in terms of the practice, and I'll talk about this more, but finding kind of a home studio or a studio space to practice in. I was kind of a serial shopper, if you will, of several studios. And so stepped away from it for a bit, but what encouraged me to re-enter the practice was my mom being diagnosed with breast cancer, and she actually found yoga. And so it's something that, although we lived in different states, we would kind of practice together, kind of at home, doing videos together and things like that. So that's what brought me back to the practice. And I also had gone on a retreat in Thailand as well, which was pretty, I think, pivotal for me in terms of my decision to step into the world of teaching yoga. And so I started teaching in just about a year and a half ago in 2019.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so one question I have: when you and your mom were doing yoga together,
Mhm.
this is before people were figuring out how to do things together online. Who played the video, or did you both play it at the same time, or how did you technically do that?
So she had actually discovered Yoga with Adrian, which is, a popular YouTube channel. She was living in Michigan at the time. I was living in Austin, and Adrian is actually from Austin. And so, so it was something that she found, and she's like, hey, did you know about Yoga with Adrian? And so essentially she would send me videos, and we would kind of, talk about the different challenges that Adrian had and kind of talk about our practices.
That's amazing. What a great connection. What a great shout out to probably one of the most famous YouTube yogis that we know.
Yes, and she's a lovely person.
Right. So tell us about the work that you do now and who you do it for.
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, I was teaching at a studio for about a year or so. And then kind of going into the summer, that's when we were truly faced, I think, with two pandemics. So COVID-19, but then also racism. And I know for me, I needed to kind of step away and take care of myself. And it became much harder for me to hold space for people. And so I made the decision to step away from teaching regularly at a studio at the beginning of the summer. And then the one kind of contracted position that I did keep was teaching law students at the University of Michigan. And there, as a part of their mental health programming, they bring in different professionals and practitioners for the students, and it's free for them. And having witnessed my dad go through law school when I was a preteen, I know how much budding attorneys need a mental health programming. And so it's an audience that's really close to my heart. And so even to this day, I'm continuing to teach them this semester. And it's just been a really, really enjoyable experience.
Oh, that's so amazing. I feel like that's a group that we maybe don't think about, especially now in the pandemic of COVID-19, is there's this whole online, college, university, high school as well, and elementary school, like all of our students all over the world, not all of them, but some of them are doing online schooling. And this is a great population to reach with yoga, especially when they're sitting there for so many hours on a screen. So then it feels like this conversation should have happened a long time ago. And I know it was happening a long time ago about how can we make a yoga space inclusive and welcoming to BIPOC, BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, people of color. And what I really caught was you said, I want to speak from the student's perspective. So I'm so curious, well, first of all, I want to find out, how are you feeling about it, about the question, and about how long it's taken to answer this question? I realize that 2020 feels like, oh, yay, the world is waking up, but maybe that's what it feels like for me as a white person.
That's a great question, and you're right. So I think a lot of trainings and a lot of things that I've seen, I think because I am now teaching yoga, it's been speaking to teacher. And I get a lot of really great feedback from my students that I treasure. And I recognize that oftentimes when we are teaching in perhaps studio settings or other settings, we don't get that much feedback from the students. And so I really started, I would say, a lot during this summer, and even with the email that you sent out in June, really started thinking about all of my experiences as a Black woman. And while I was excited about the awakening and felt really hopeful for the first time in many years, it was also triggering. And so as I started to think about my experiences at work, as I started to think about my experiences as a yoga teacher and a yoga student, that's when I started really revisiting that seat of the student and saying, knowing that the yoga world is grasping onto this conversation and I see people wanting to do better, can I put myself in the perspective of being the student again? And I know yoga teachers are perpetual students. But I think sometimes we perhaps as teachers can lose that awareness of what our students are experiencing, even from walking in the door of studios as they're starting to reopen now. or, starting to check into classes online.
Right. I love that you addressed that it brings up hope and it's also triggering. I think that's really important to note. And so what are some of you're welcome to share some of the experiences that really helps us to root it in story, or you can touch on here are some of the things that our yoga teacher, it probably the root starts at yoga teacher training, but also our individual teachers and studios if they've already gone through those trainings. What are some of the things that you wish that we were more aware of?
Yeah. So I want to say that one of the things that I love about your podcast is you've focused a lot when you've spoken with folks about doing anti-racism work about kind of the starting with the heart, right? Like doing that heart work first. This is not meant to be a checklist. This is not meant to speak for all Black yogis or people of color, right? But what I am finding is that sometimes people are saying, okay, I've done this work. I've sat with learning and put myself in the position of being uncomfortable and examining, what's going on within my studio or how I'm teaching. Now what, right? How do I move forward? How do I put it into practice? And so I'm hoping to offer some insights from a student's perspective. Again, not a checklist, right? People will know if you're being disingenuous, but things I think to consider as you are reopening your studio or as you are engaging with students. So speaking from my experience, one of the things that as I was reflecting back on it, I realized I've never been a member of a yoga studio, but I have taken a lot of different classes. I've purchased a lot of, different passes and visited the same studio frequently, but never kind of signed up to say, okay, I'm going to be a monthly member and all of that. And I think I've perhaps done this kind of hopping around of just trying to find the place that fits, right? Trying to find kind of a central home base. And I also used to travel a lot for business as well. And so I frequently visit yoga studios when I am traveling on business or for pleasure. And so going back to kind of starting with that experience that happens at the door, there have been a few occasions at which I've been kind of, to describe it as othering at the door, right? So I walk into a yoga studio and I've gotten a few times of, I've never seen you before, right? And so just kind of this, right when you walk in, automatically I recognize that you are a stranger. Now, the studios that I've been to have been predominantly white in terms of the clientele. And so as classes are filling up, I'm like, okay, now, I understand kind of why I got that comment. Other times I've received it and I have been to the studio several times. It's just perhaps that I wasn't seen. And so, when we talk about people entering into spaces, whether it's a studio or a community space or whatnot, in training, one of the things that I was taught is just get to know your students. How are they doing? What is their experience level with yoga? Don't make those assumptions. And, that starts, I think, right when someone walks in.
Yeah. This is making me think of how we greet all of our yoga students. If anyone had been to the studio before, in a busy studio, it's hard to remember everyone's faces and everyone's names. And so we could all take a look at how we are greeting people. Like if we were saying, oh, I haven't seen you before and you have been there, that does feel insulting. And you're also saying it doesn't feel welcoming if it is your first time there.
Right.
Can you think of a greeting that would be like across the board would feel welcoming?
Yeah, a greeting that I think would feel welcoming is, someone walks into a space. Hey, how are you? Is this your first time at the studio? If it's a yes, then, have you tell me a little bit about your experience, your background with yoga, right? So just kind of that general familiarity conversation. In other instances, I've also been completely ignored. So as someone coming in new to a studio, there's perhaps the teacher has a familiarity with kind of other people. And it's, kind of, this new girl over here. And then I'm just going to kind of hang out with, my friends or greet the people who I know. And so I think that there is a fine balance, right? With yoga teachers, that relationship that they're building with students is really important. It doesn't just happen within the room, right, as you're building trust in a vulnerable space. But again, I think it starts, with the introduction of that experience. And so I think taking stock of, yes, here are the folks that I do know and perhaps have some familiarity with, but also too, here are some people who might be newer to the studio, and how can I greet them without othering them and saying, I have never seen you before. And so just kind of thinking about that initial experience and thinking about that introduction.
Yeah. There's an element of this, and I actually don't know how to verbalize it. So since June, I feel like I'm listening more to people of color and hearing more stories, and hearing this othering is this thread that goes through. And I don't know how privileged people or white people like myself can actually understand that until they're hearing it over and over again from multiple people and listening as well. Because I feel like there's a temptation, and a yoga teacher could be listening to this and thinking, well, anyone could feel that walking into a yoga studio. Maybe it's someone who is naturally just more sensitive. Like there's this defensiveness that might come up in yoga teachers or yoga studios. Do you want to speak to that at all?
I think you make a great point, because certainly the assumption could be like, oh, well, that individual could be taking that really personally. But I'll say this, for people to walk into a yoga space, we know that it can be an incredibly vulnerable practice, right? We talk a lot about inclusivity in language. We talk a lot about inclusivity in ability, offering modifications and being mindful and aware of experience levels for students. And many times it's not visible, right? So what people are, in terms of physical capabilities and what people are walking in with, it's not visible. But to be a Black yogi who, again, has visited many studios in many states, and to walk around as a Black woman in many instances, I am used to it at work, I'm used to it at conferences, I'm used to being kind of the lonely only in many situations. And many times I expect it, right? So in professional settings, for me, sometimes there's that mental preparation of, yes, I will likely be one of the very few Black people here, and walking in with that expectation. I also walk into that expectation in yoga studios. And it's a practice that I have come to love. It's a practice that I very much so cherish enough to want to share it and teach it to other people. But recognizing that there is this additional vulnerability that takes place. And I think with Black people being excluded from just the yoga world in general, right? So we're not in the advertisements for all the popular brands. So our images are not widely represented in the yoga world. And so in studios, that's followed as well, and not seeing a lot of Black people in studio spaces. That's for me when it's walking in with that added vulnerability, knowing I'm going to be the only one, but also I'm going to be in this very vulnerable practice.
Oh, I love that you shared this, that it's a vulnerability to consider. I know that our yoga teachers who I talk with and work with, they want to make really inclusive spaces. And I was listening to a Black yoga teacher talking in a workshop, and she was saying, I want to get more Black people into my classes. And the yoga world, it's not happening as easily as it could or as it should. And you touched on something with the images. So if we're not seeing people in classes, we want to bring more people of color, more Black people into our classes. I know that the answer is not just, I'm going to get some stock photos and put Black people up on my website. And we know that that is tokenism. So how do we do that? And this is really dependent probably as well in where we live. So I live in a very white population in a rural place in Ontario, Canada. So this conversation is maybe different for some of our yoga teachers all over the world, but I think the message is going to be the same with so many other populations. Like, how can we bring in the people who walk in with that extra vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. This may be the only academic kind of related reference that I make because I'm trying to be very application and experiential based. So my master's thesis was related to education, and it was a content analysis looking at recruitment literature of predominantly white institutions here in the States and seeing how they promoted themselves, being predominantly white institutions, how they promoted themselves to students of color. And because of that experience that I went through, I'm very aware of recruitment literature, and having studied advertising, I know the importance of representation in advertising and in literature. And so it's a great question. And I think one of the things that feels genuine and authentic to me is not to overrepresent, right? And portray your studio as being representative. And I'll be honest, I to this day, I am the black face for a studio. And I knew that the photos were being taken and part of my work there. But I have now become kind of that token minority. And it feels uncomfortable and disingenuous because knowing the population of students who go there. So don't do that. But if you're having trouble attracting a diverse student population, I think then there's an opportunity to do deeper reflection and start to think, where can I have representation in other areas? Perhaps it's within your teaching staff and you make a more concerted effort to recruit teachers from diverse backgrounds. Maybe it's in your administrative staff. Workshop offerings, I think, is a great opportunity to invite in experts of different modalities into your space, while also being honest with them and letting them know, okay, this is our student demographic, but here's where we're struggling. But we wanted to invite you in to kind of share this additional perspective, and just being honest about where you're at, I think, is a great place to start.
This is so good. And right now is an amazing opportunity. We've lost a lot of things like the ability to travel and do different things, but right now you could get teachers from all over the globe, such a diverse group of teachers, to share workshops online for a studio. And what I was going to say is, it's something to scroll like on a virtual summit or something. And now I'm paying more attention to who is in the lineup of this. Like, wow, it's all white people. Or when I've been asked, can you be part of this? Someone reached out to me this week and said, do you know of a yoga teacher who's a business coach who is a person of color? And I was sitting there like, do I? It's not just me who's starting to think, how can I bring more diversity into this? So I love how you said, that's where it starts. That's how we can attract those students. And it needs to be genuine. We need to do the work, look at our teacher lineup. And there was a question that I had in my head. Now it's gone for a second. It'll come back.
So I wanted to grab onto what you said in terms of someone asking you this week about, they're looking for an expert who also is a person of color. So one of the Facebook groups that I belong to, in addition to the one associated with your podcast, is Black Yoga Teachers Alliance. And there are, I checked as of this morning, 4,800 practitioners.
That's amazing.
Yes. All experts, all different modalities, all over the world. And they've been a really great source of knowledge and referrals for me. But that could be a great place to start in terms of, there's freelancers. I mean, people similar to the teachers that you have in your Facebook group, there's even more, and kind of with the commonality that they're all, Black. So
this is so good. Now, I want to check with you. Does that mean everyone in that group identifies as a Black yoga teacher?
Yes, that is correct. Or practitioner. Yeah. So either Black yoga teacher, practitioners, also folks who do kind of other healing and wellness and modalities.
Okay. And just yesterday, I was talking to someone who said that they run a group that's for all South Asian yoga teachers. I guess where I'm sitting as a podcast host and someone who invites medical experts into pelvic health professionals is I don't see those groups. Sometimes there are directories in different places. Maybe we'll get there, but how would I reach out to that group? And that was my question from before. How do you do this in an authentic way? Like someone in June posted this thing like, I'm hiring a person of color. And I was just like, I don't think you can legally do that. I don't think you can post like that.
Yeah, because I think then you come from the perspective, I think, of the quotas, right? Or even further tokenism or marginalization.
Yes.
I think that for studio owners or teachers who are looking to embrace, I think, more diverse perspectives, it's a fine line because you don't want to have the perspective of like, oh, this person of color, the burden's on them to teach me. Right. But I think I want to say for someone like you, Shannon, you've opened this door, right? There is this consistent pattern that you want to include more diverse voices. You're doing the work, you're in the work. And so part of it depends on, if you want to go with someone who is kind of doing more anti-racism work or DEI work, right? And then saying, it's because of your work in this area that I want, that I'm really eager to have you as a guest. Feel like I'm botching.
Well, you're not botching it because here's what I've come to as a podcast host. I've always asked people to come on because of the amazing content they have and their knowledge.
Yeah.
But there was a point like a year ago where I reached out to someone on our team who is a person of color and said, we have too many white people on our podcast. Like, I don't know what to do. I have white friends. The yoga world is washed in white. And she was like, this is going to be slow and steady. You're just going to have to search harder.
Yeah. So I think why I'm struggling with this is because as a teacher, I don't want to be selected just because I'm Black. And as a teacher, there's many great experts who are doing work in the yoga world around inclusion, around DEI, around anti-racism. I am not that person, right? I have kind of a separate teaching style and a separate modality. But I also know that for Black students and even students who identify as underrepresented minorities, my presence, and this is feedback that I have received, but my presence as a teacher in the room matters. For me, it is refreshing to have teachers who are Black or people of color, just to kind of have a difference of perspective. And it's sad to say that it's surprising, but there's also, when I go back to that stepping into a space that is already demanding vulnerability or asking for vulnerability, seeing that and the kind of familiarity in a teacher reflected in me, it takes some of that away. And I think that when I see yoga studios who are intentionally offering workshops from people of color, even retail spaces, right, that are supporting Black businesses, it's refreshing. And sadly, it's unexpected now, but I think it's going to require us not just, kind of this slow and steady pace, but I think it's going to require us to perhaps think outside of the box, right? And think about what, for studios and teachers, like what feels natural to them.
Right. This is good. It's because there's no checklist. Here are all the easy answers. Mm-hmm. And me as a person of privilege and a person who was put in this place of real discomfort in June, I mean, along the way, it was definitely there, but it feels like it was a different vibration of it. It would be comforting to have a checklist. And I appreciate that you're like, okay, this isn't the easiest thing to answer. So if we think about that welcoming into the studio, are there any other instances where you thought, this does not feel right? Like the yoga world needs to feel what I feel in this moment.
Yeah, I'll certainly share too with, and I know now that we're in a pandemic environment, there's not as much as this going on. But I think when we look at festivals or even retreats, there's a really great opportunity to consider representation. And in the teacher lineup, yes. And in the experts who you're inviting in, absolutely. But also, I think for vendors, there's an opportunity to really think critically about representation. And after this, I'll go into retail spaces some more because I think that there's a unique opportunities too. So festivals and retreats and vendors. One festival that I went to, again, predominantly white, it's kind of out in the woods, out in nature. And automatically I am looking for kind of the darker faces who, people who look like me, again, just to kind of establish that familiarity and that comfort. And I didn't see a lot and was kind of disappointed with that because it was a very large festival in a big diverse metro area. So then we get to the vendors, and the food that was served was vegan or vegetarian. That was kind of the theme. And there was just like no vendors of color for anything, not in the t-shirts, not the essential oils, not in the jewelry, not in the, the vegan food or anything. And one of the things that I thought about was in Detroit, there's two sisters. They have a soul food restaurant. It's called Detroit Vegan Soul. And they're pretty popular in our area. And I was just like, what a missed opportunity to not, again, have either this vendor or more vendors who represent and who are from more diverse backgrounds. And I think even going into studio spaces, when you think about filling your retail spaces, either with books or jewelry or essential oils, candles, mats, clothing, all of it, like there's just such an opportunity. And there are great Black business owners in these spaces. And even today, this morning, I was looking at just a random list of Black-owned businesses that someone posted on LinkedIn. It was talking about Black women and being Black women pursuing more entrepreneurial opportunities in light of this pandemic. And one of the companies featured was a candle company by a Black husband and wife team. And it was like, oh, that's, as many times as I've seen candles in yoga studio retail spaces, I'm like, that's a great company. There's another company, and it's two sisters who are making and selling yoga mats and other accessories. Their mom does the illustrations for the yoga mats. Most of them feature Black people. I think one yoga mat actually features women of different ethnicities, which is pretty cool. So just, again, thinking outside of the box about, okay, so can I in some way support Black-owned businesses in my retail space?
Oh, I love this so much. Another thing that I love to do is, let's say we have guests on. This might not sound fair to white people, and I just want you to then check your privilege. So if I have a white guest on, this is what I've come to do lately. You can tell me I'm wrong. Anybody's welcome to send an email. I'll give you a fake email address. Is if I have a white person on and they have a book, oftentimes I just will ask them, do you want to send me a book? Do you want to give a free book to our audience? Oftentimes they'll do that anyway, or their publisher will. Sometimes I purchase the book because I want to read it. But what I've kind of made this rule lately is any person of color who I'm interviewing, if they have a book, a product, maybe a class online or something, I look and see, is there some way that I can support this person? Mm-hmm. And I think this is important that we look at, it might not be like, I can't pay every podcast guest for their time, but I can look at ways that I can. So I love that you're talking about this in terms of a studio, how it could be really embedded in where someone wouldn't even see it right away, but you would eventually see that. Do you think it would be uncomfortable for a person of color? I'm thinking of like a yoga show or a yoga conference, or like you said, that big event where there's like a discount for people of color. Is that okay? Would that be something that would draw people in, or would it just be doing the work and searching more?
That's an interesting idea. And I was actually a part of a conversation for a studio who wanted to go in that direction. So here's the thing. My initial reaction to that is, as a Black woman who, I have the resources to purchase passes at yoga studios. And so I was a part of a conversation where a yoga studio was considering a discount for people of color. My initial reaction was that it could be a tool for kind of othering, right? And making the assumption about the economic status of an individual. And for me, I think my reaction would be, because I do have the means and fortunately the resources to pay and attend yoga classes, but the expense is not the reason why I'm not walking into your studio that's predominantly white, right? It's the environment, or it's something about where I don't feel comfortable in that space, or there's something about it where I'm like, And so if your goal is to reach out to underserved communities, in populations who, because there definitely is a financial barrier to practicing yoga, then make it the same for everyone, right? So, or utilize donation-based classes and see if perhaps, in your area to offer people the opportunity to pay what they can, see if that is something that is actually impactful in your area. But don't start with the assumption that, Black people or people of color need a discount to attend your yoga class, right? Because economically it's not feasible for them.
This is so good.
Yeah, I had a conversation too with actually a woman who runs a festival, and she was like, well, we thought about making it discounted, for Black people. And I was like, that's not why we're not going. It's because once we do go, we're not seeing ourselves represented in any other way aside from a discounted ticket. And so that's not helpful.
Right. What I'm hearing over and over again is that there's no quick fix to this. People that are privileged and the white people in the yoga world, and we might not like to hear it, we need to do some heavy lifting in this right now. And we need to really take a look, and it's much deeper than that. This is so good. I'm thinking of back to when I managed a yoga studio, and we had this, it was called a round robin practice, and we would have yoga teachers come in and just teach. It was kind of like impromptu yoga, like you'd just draw numbers and you'd teach in this row, and then we'd raise money. All of that money would go towards passes for the studio. And we had it on our website that anyone who wanted to get a hold of one of those passes would have one, so that there would be no difference other than they'd send a quick email to our team. That was all confidential, but they would have a pass like everyone else. You would never be able to tell. None of the staff would be able to tell, nobody except that person who did admin. And I think that's really important when we're looking at how, because yoga teachers want to help. I know we do. It's mostly coming from a great place of intention, but also we live in a society where there is this white privilege that exists, and we've grown up in that culture. So it's important to keep asking. Like, your answer is so helpful for me to see. Of course, that's not the answer. It's just to say, like, okay, all people of color get a discount to be a vendor at this thing.
And I think that's kind of also drawing on my experience. So I worked for several years in higher education, and we talked about kind of, there's the recruitment of certain student groups, and then there's the retention, right? So how do we keep them? And so you may have a flashy discount or something, right, to get people in the door. But if the environment that you're creating doesn't speak to inclusivity, if the environment that you're creating isn't welcoming, then, you're not going to keep that student, that individual past one class. And so that's where, the work is not just getting people to sign up or in the door. The work is to actually keep them there and expose them to the practice of yoga. I think especially during this pandemic, we've had to, I think within the yoga world, really think creatively about, is this the time to teach another asana class? Or can we focus on the other aspects of yoga? And for me personally, I subscribe to the 8-limb path. And so how do we teach the other limbs? Is it doing a common book read? Is it talking about other, modalities and styles of yoga that perhaps can demonstrate, I think, more representation and bring in a more represented audience as well?
I love this, that you have this experience of recruiting and thinking about this kind of in a different space and mixed with your own experience as a Black yoga student. Is there anything else that you would share with our yoga teachers and yoga studios that you feel like is one more thing that we can consider?
So I'll say this, for being in the actual classes themselves, other ways I think that where teachers can kind of do the work, and I say this from the perspective of a student, kind of what I craved a little bit more of. So we know about kind of theming, right, in our classes, and, making the physical practice relevant to the philosophical practice and other tenets of yoga. And so in your themes, there's an opportunity to think about the stories that you're sharing, the quotes that you're sharing as well, and from who. And even thinking about highlighting different, if you use music, but highlighting different musicians, or if you're bringing in live music, and again, kind of partnering with other folks to help facilitate or teaching in class. So really, we started this conversation about starting at the door, right? And kind of that welcoming experience that you're creating, how to think about redesigning your space or thinking about your retail space, or how you're supporting and uplifting other practitioners and yogis of color, through your vendor spaces, through your retail spaces and supporting Black businesses and that type of thing, but also too within your actual class, right? So how are you moving towards inclusion? And it comes out in, the words that you say, not just thinking about the abilities of who's in the room, but again, whose stories are you using? What are you theming about? Whose quotes are you using to support those themes? Is, I think, another consideration. And as a student, there is one particular person, who's a white woman who's been quoted very frequently in yoga classes, and I won't mention the name because I don't want to, she's great, but it is refreshing, and it has been refreshing to be introduced to different philosophers, to different nuggets of wisdom, I guess you could say, from folks who aren't white, and who have different, kind of life stories and life experiences. And so I think within the theming, I think that there's an opportunity to tell the stories of Black, Indigenous people of color within your classes, and perhaps how they can enhance your yoga theme, or their stories can kind of strengthen your yoga theme and what you're trying to share through the physical practice.
That's amazing. I never thought of this aspect of like quotes and music and the theme and the stories that we tell. That is really good. And also because it should be very easy because white people that's not where yoga originated at all, wasn't with white people. So we should easily be able to find quotes and teachings from people of color. Thank you so much for all of this. Now, I feel like we'd have to be in law school to take a yoga class with you right now. Is that right?
That is true, yes. They're a group that's incredibly near and dear to my heart. And I can't imagine, learning from them, but what it is like to start law school, in the middle of a pandemic. But I think for folks who, these folks who have a heightened awareness of justice, and that is, the thing that they're pursuing. And so being able to support them right now is an absolute privilege.
Is there any other way that our yoga teacher listeners can support the work that you do?
Honestly, so I'm not going to send you to my defunct Instagram page, but I will say this. I think that, again, I see a lot of people out in the yoga world who want to do this work around inclusion. And as I said before, and you've had some phenomenal experts on who have guided folks through doing that work and looking internally. But don't stop there, right? And so it really, I think, is demanding us to put it in practice. And I would say, as you're taking different webinars or listening to different podcasts and trying to do this personal inner work, start to think about the students who perhaps want to attract, or students who are already coming to your classes and your studios, and really start to think about, I think, the application of it. So what does it look like for me as a yoga teacher, as a studio owner, to have a more inclusive space? And what are those little things that I can start to do and start to implement and share with my staff, share with my team, so that we do become a more welcoming and open and representative space?
I just feel this huge gratitude toward you for taking the time to really share some solid ideas in your own life experience, and also in your experience of trying to bring this into different aspects of your work. And when you said the word illuminating, that's the perfect word for right now. And also that this isn't, do these few things and then it's over. Yeah, our yoga teachers, our yoga community needs to figure out how we can continue with this work. So thank you for all of your time today, for that email that started this. And yeah, thank you so much.
No, and thank you once again for opening the door. And I think, as yoga teachers, we talk about, we're always in the work, right? And so how can we be in the work, alongside our students, be okay with making mistakes? As I think Michelle Johnson, one of your guests, said recently, and I think too, approaching it again from the place of non-judgment, right? So I think any, movement forward, even if you feel like it's not this grand thing, right? Those baby steps, I think are just so important at the end of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This has been so great. thank you again, Erin, for taking the time to send that original reply email. It means so much. I actually would like to link to some of the things that you put in that email in our show notes because I think they are so helpful for all of our listeners or podcasters or studio owners. Erin's email was so well laid out to me. I'm just still so grateful. There's so much here that I can dig into as a podcaster who wants to continue on with this work. Some of the links are the Amplify Collectivo, Yoga for Black Lives, Sacha Yoga Co-op, Yoga in Color, Brown Sugar, Yoga for Folks of Color, Black Girl in Ohm. I'm going to make sure that all of these links are in the show notes for you. Also, there's an article, More Black Men Embracing Yoga, and there's a Black Male Yoga initiative as well, and I'll make sure that we link to those. Erin mentioned the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance. I'll make sure that that link is also in there. Erin talked about how this continuous education is something that I can do to do better. Her words were so kind. I really felt like she was very much taking the time in this email and also in this podcast episode and just giving and giving. Some of the other things that Erin put in that email were for us to look at how we could diversify our panel of experts, how we could highlight the experiences of yogis of color, and how we could feature experts that tackle health issues that are really prevalent in Black communities. So I am 100% in for this sort of like very well laid out plan in this email. This is why it is such a gift when feedback is given in this way and when someone takes the time to give the feedback. So again, thank you so much, Erin. Your email really was and still is one that I return to, and I have it in this file that I keep of sweet things that people said or growth that I can have, not only as a yoga teacher, but also a podcaster. I want to give a huge shout out of thank you to our team who has also been all in for talking about this in our staff meetings or staff messages back and forth and really sharing some profound words. Suzanne, Crunch, Nick, and Sinead, thank you so much for making today's episode possible and for so much more. Connected Yoga Teachers, thank you for making not only this year much more bearable, because honestly, it's been a tough year for me as well as the world, and you hanging out here makes it a much better place. You digging in and doing the work in yourself, in your community, in your business is so important to this world. And I am just honored to be a part of it. I am just honored that you've hung out and listened. If you are taking time in December for holidays, I hope you have fantastic holidays. I hope you find some time for rest and reflection. And we have one more episode next week together, and I am so excited about this episode. Let me give a little teaser. One of the guests, because there are two guests, one of the guests has written 10 books and taught for 50 years. So if you know who that is, I would love to hear from you what your guess might be. You can send me a message, maybe DM me on Instagram at The Connected Yoga Teacher. And I also want to know what you might be doing as we get ready to close this year out. Is there some way that you have thought of where you can stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can continue to share the yoga that lights you up?